Good morning, you're watching Business World Live. I'm Danie, Laurel.
And in just Delos Santos, it's the start of a new trading day. But first, let's go straight to our top story. The local bourse has tightened rules on voluntary delisting following complaints from minority shareholders who are not satisfied with the tender offer price given by firms that have delisted from the stock exchange in the previous years. Under the new rules approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the delisting must be approved by at least two-thirds of the entire board, which should include not less than two of its independent directors and stockholders owning at least two-thirds of the total outstanding and listed share of the company. The listed firm should also ensure that the votes against the delisting plan do not exceed 10% of the total outstanding and listed shares. The previous rules only require the approval of a company's board to delist. The new rules also mandate that the minimum tender offer price shall be the higher of the highest valuation based on a fairness opinion or valuation report provided by an independent provider. Now, the PSC crafted the rules in response to complaints over the delisting of Melco Resorts and Travelers International Group. The new rules will take effect immediately. Okay, Dan, so it will be harder for companies to actually escape the markets, but investors can still pull out anytime. How's that Santa Rally or non-rally doing?
Parang tapos na nga the Santa Rally, Jess. That's actually what analysts have been saying, right? We had it earlier on in December. You can see on my screens here. I'm actually going to pull out the year-to-date chart so you can see how from the March lows, we were inching our ways up na. You know, November was a very month for our equity markets, but it seems that the 7,200 levels, 7,300 levels was still not really sustainable. We're now sliding back to 7,100 levels, so we're down by 0.5%. Now, this according to PHILSTAR, it follows another day of profit taking on Monday. There was a lack of catalyst. AAA equities is saying investors are trying to steal a profit right before the holidays. But still, there was strong turnovers of trading on Monday. That was around 8.5 billion pesos. And PHILSTAR is saying this says that even if investors had conviction to trade, that was still relatively low compared to last week. Now, if you take a quick peek at, of course, how the rest of the markets are doing offshore, we are not necessarily standing out here. In fact, we're doing a little bit better than some markets. Take a look at Europe here. Major slump yesterday. This is following general sentiment there on a new virus strain in the United Kingdom. Recall that they had done the vaccination, and this herd immunity plan of theirs seems to be triggering a new virus strain. And in fact, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France have closed their borders to the UK for the time being. Now, I just want to take a quick peek on a couple of stocks here, Jess, that we've been following since last week. One is MEGAWIDE. So that's the latest on this NAIA saga here, Jess. They have now officially, and this is according to the Philippines Star, appealed to the government for the reinstatement of their original proponent status for the NAIA rehabilitation. Now, what is the story here? Apparently, there was a letter in November which had actually said, this is from the NEDA ICC committee, that they had evaluated MEGAWIDE's proposal and their equity position is not sufficient to finance the equity requirement of the proposed project. So that's actually what led to them revoking the OPS. However, MEGAWIDE then submitted new documents, but then they were already revoked. So what MEGAWIDE is saying is that if you actually evaluate this new document that they have given, which shows their new financial position, then the decision should be made after seeing those documents. Nevertheless, MEGAWIDE down by 1.2% this morning. Now, still speaking of awarding from the government here in terms of new projects, you've got one at least. And that is Philex Mining. So I just want to take a quick peek at Philex. Let's see if we can take a peek at the PMINI index, actually, because it's been a while. They have received a 25-year renewal from the DENR for the Silangan Mindanao Mining Corporation. That's going to be in Surigao del Norte there. So the new term will start on December 29, 2024. And they're actually going to have another 25 years from them. Now, take a look at Philex Mining. mining. That is the star player of the mining corp, counter here that's up by close to 90% year to date. Just want to take a quick peek at how it's opening this morning. It actually is down along with the rest of the local bourse by 1.5%. Now let's move on to that vaccine story, that you've been talking about. The government, at least here in the Philippines, now has a new plan for funding that, and they're tapping ADB this time. For how much do we need that support, Jess?
Okay, we're talking about 325 million US dollars here in terms of loans from the Asian Development Bank. That's tantamount to at least 15.6 billion pesos here. Now, should that be approved by the lender, then that's going to be part of ADB's $9 billion Asia Pacific Vaccine Access Facility, or APVAX. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But the program really is meant to actually help developing countries in procuring vaccines. Now, according to Kelly Bird, he is a country director of ADB here in the Philippines. The maximum allowed borrowing for the Philippines under the APVAX program is actually between 400 to 500 million US dollars. And according to him, they are already in close talks with the Department of Health as well as the Finance Department. And that might actually be up for consideration by their board very, very quickly. The question is, how does a country actually qualify for APVAX? So they have a number of qualifications here from the Asian Development Bank. That includes a national vaccination allocation plan, which in the Philippines, at the same time will actually try to determine which citizens will actually get it first and when. Now, in case of the Philippines, that would actually be 20 million citizens annually for the next 3 years at least, with healthcare workers and the vulnerable sector to actually be prioritized for the mass inoculation. Now, at the same time, they are going to determine as well whether you are qualified for the program, depending on the vaccine which the country is going to procure. So there are certain grounds as well, or a gauge when it comes to vaccines here. That vaccine has to be acquired by countries under the COVAX program of the World Health Organization. At the same time, the developer must be pre-qualified by WHO and authorized by a stringent regulator for manufacturing. In this case, Pfizer would be qualified, considering, of course, that it has already been granted approval from by the US and the UK FDA. Now, there are other as well technical assistance here that ADB is willing to provide developing countries. That includes technical assistance for capacity support, monitoring, and surveillance of procurement and distribution. So far, of course, the Philippines has already $4.2 billion worth of loans from the ADB this year alone. That's part, of course, of the country's pandemic responses at the same time for developing infrastructure projects.
All right. Well, hope we can actually pay back those loans and get those vaccines on time, Jess. Now, we'll have more on the news when Business World Live returns. Stay with us. When health and mobility are the biggest concerns, the human resources function has become more valuable than ever. Now, here to share with us how IBM has coped with workforce change and to give an overall picture of the HR function, we have with us Connie Sanin-Ignacio. She is the Manila Delivery Center Leader for HR Services at IBM Philippines. Good morning, ma'am, and welcome to the broadcast.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Miss Connie, let's kick off with this survey. This was done across 1,500 HR leaders. It was done with an expert, Josh Bursin. Give us the main results of this survey, especially in the context of this changing world of work.
Yes, so we see that the business environment is clearly changing. It's constantly being disrupted. And as a result of that, we also see HR evolving yet anew. This is not the first time HR is evolving. And we wanted to understand what this new HR operating model is, which we are calling HR 3.0. And so IBM Institute for Business Value, or IBV, together with Josh Bersin, conducted this study of 1,500 HR executives globally coming from 12 different industries. And they saw that those more mature, more successful organizations, the CHROs are really doing a lot in terms of contributing to the digital transformation of the business in order to make the business more relevant, especially now in the face of the pandemic, in order to support the business stay afloat and thrive in the different normal. We saw that there are many things that HR now more than ever is called to do. And among them is the closing of the skills gap, which we saw is ever widening. That's one. Secondly, also is the focus that HR now needs to put more emphasis in terms of the employee well-being, both the physical and mental well-being. And thirdly is HR using technology in order to make data-driven decisions.
Ma'am, can we contextualize this in a Philippine context, especially since we are not necessarily the leaders when it comes to digital pivot? You know, there have been several surveys that the Philippines is lagging compared to the rest of Southeast Asia. And another issue here is that we are mainly MSMEs, right? So smaller companies. And does that have an impact on the ways in which people can adapt quickly with the changing times?
Yes, yes. So one of the studies, COVID-19 and the Future of Business, as it's called, included insights from Philippine executives. And this is what we saw. 81% of Philippine executives believe that they are helping their employees learn skills that are needed during today's new normal. And these skills requirement are some of them are quite new. As a result of the business and technical leaders shifting their focus to help them, stay afloat. So they apply these exponential technologies, and they're seeing that not a lot of their employees have the skills needed to support these new technologies. So in the survey, 81% of them said they're helping their employees cope. Now, in terms of promoting or supporting mental and emotional and physical well-being, they said 73% of them are doing something in that area. Now, what's interesting is when the employees were asked, they gave a totally different picture. As opposed to 81%, the employee said only 46% of them, or sorry, only 48% of them feel that the companies are doing enough, their employers are doing enough in terms of giving them the skills needed. And only less than half of them said that they are actually experiencing the support being provided to them in terms of their physical and emotional well-being. So there's a big
Okay.
gap there, and that's where HR comes in, and where HR really needs to operate as a strategic advisor to close that gap between employers and employees.
Okay, ma'am, can you talk about the future of work? And
Yes.
especially now, HR has a huge function because people are working remotely, and as you mentioned, there's a huge need for mental health, advocacy as well. Do you see this as a temporary situation that people need to be getting through during this pandemic, or do you see a real shift in the ways in which we will be working, in the ways in which HR will need to really be involved in the day-to-day lives of
Mhm.
people moving forward, especially with everything, so many moving parts moving forward?
Yeah, I see this as a permanent change. I don't think that it's correct to assume that things will go back to the way they were before. Going back to the report that I mentioned earlier, when we surveyed the executives of high performing companies, we saw that there were 8 times as likely to be driving disruption in their organization. So you talk about, how this will be changing the landscape on a permanent basis. And we see three things that companies would need to do in order to promote lasting change. It will help them thrive, not just survive in the new normal. So accelerating the pace of continuous learning and feedback, and that is very important. Cultivating empathetic leadership to become a more health-oriented company and support employees' holistic well-being. And thirdly is reinventing their HR function and technology architecture to make more real-time data-driven decisions. And so technology plays an important role in terms of making the organization or the workforce sustainable. But I must say, however, that at the center of all this is still the human resource, still very, very important, still very vital. That employers put focus on the holistic well-being of their employees.
And ma'am, last question before we let you go, because I'm very
Okay.
curious about this. What is the take of HR leaders when it comes to no more face-to-face contact? Can digital, Zoom meetings and the lack of social contact really replace the need for human interaction? Can this be a sustainable business model if, if it's managed properly? And how do you feel about automation now changing the game instead of having this human dynamic and functions?
Yeah. Well, as I said, the human element is still going to be very important, right? But in the new normal, in the different normal, yes, we see more and more of virtual interaction. And it forced us to rethink how we do work and where we do work. That's number one. We became more creative in terms of finding ways and means to keep our employees engaged, despite being virtual, despite being remote. And we see now the role of the office as a destination where people come for some highly engaging activities or workshops. So I see it more as a hybrid model where
Okay.
people work from home but also find an opportunity to come together to do some interaction, some workshops, some planning, some design thinking activities.
Okay, very interesting view there, especially since now we have, maybe closer interaction with those in our homes, but we'll
Yeah.
still also try to have that hybrid interaction with our colleagues as well. Thank you so much for those
Okay.
updates. That was, of course, Connie Sanin-Ignacio from
Thank you.
IBM Philippines.
Thank you.
Now, here are other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. The government is in talks with France for potential deals in nuclear energy and disaster management. Trade Under Secretary Seferino Ordolfo had a virtual meeting with French counterparts last week to discuss areas of cooperation including infrastructure, transportation, electronics, and renewable energy. No details of the discussions were provided. France has a significant nuclear power industry, generating more than half of its electricity from nuclear power plants. Their goal is to reduce nuclear dependence to 50% by 2035, while the Philippines is close to making a decision whether to include nuclear power in its energy mix. France is one of the 17 target markets under the government's recently launched investment promotion campaign. Now, the joint venture of Sumitomo Corporation and the Japan Transport Engineering Corporation, or JTREC, will supply 240 train cars or wagons for the first phase of the Metro Manila subway project. Now, this was agreed upon in a 367 billion peso deal signed by the Japan joint venture and the Transportation Department on Monday. Transportation Undersecretary for Railways, Timothy Batan, noted that the order is larger than the 224 operational train cars the country had back in 2016. Last year, the JTREC and Sumitomo JV was also awarded the contract for the rolling stock package of the North-South Commuter Railway project in the amount of almost 740 million pesos. The department expects the tunneling work on the first phase of the project to begin in the second half of next year. Now, Unilever recently announced new global commitments to raise nutrition standards and address food waste. Now, in the Philippines, Unilever's food and refreshment brands have made great strides in sustainability and are gearing to accelerate its portfolio transformation. To talk about that, we have with us Kristine Go. She's the Foods and Beverages Director of Unilever Philippines. Good morning, Kristine. Nice that you could join us in the show this morning.
Morning, Jess.
Okay, so let's kick things off. I want to know what exactly is Unilever's Foods Ambition and what are the commitments under this program?
So our future foods ambition is a global commitment with two key objectives. One, to help people transition towards healthier diets, and two, to help reduce the environmental impact of the commitments include halving the food waste across our global operations, doubling the number of products delivering positive nutrition globally by 2025, growing our business on plant-based alternatives for billion euros in 7 years, and continuing to lower calorie, salt, and sugar levels across all of our products by 2020. Unilever is actually one of the world's largest food companies, so that we have a critical role to play in helping to transform our global food systems.
Okay, like what you mentioned, like what Kristine was mentioning, of course, Unilever has a great role to play when it comes, of course, to making that shift towards a more sustainable food program, especially here in the Philippines. But what exactly do you mean, Kristine, by transforming food systems? And why is this important for Unilever?
So thank you for that question, Jess. I think the reality is that we know that by 2050 we will have about 10 billion people on the planet. That's so much more than what we have today. And if we want to feed everyone in a fair, sustainable, and nutritious way, we will need to make radical changes. Today, around 2 billion people are overweight, while nearly a billion people go to bed hungry. Our current way of producing and consuming food is actually consuming up the Earth's natural resources faster than we can remake it and contributing to climate change. On top of all these, a third of all food produced is actually being thrown away. In order to address the interlinked changes in climate, nature, food, and people, everyone must step up. Businesses like ours, governments, farmers, and even consumers. The action and collaboration that we take now and over the next decade will actually be critical to the success of everyone.
So definitely, lots of all the stakeholders, of course, have to take part in order to address that gap and that imbalance. But question is, how are these changes and commitments starting to take shape in the country?
We have actually started this journey 10 years ago when we first introduced our sustainable living plan. We have long-standing zero waste to landfill. Our products actually adhere to the highest nutritional standards, and these are actually aligned with the WHO's guidelines. Many of the crops that are relevant to our season, breast meats, and ice cream brands in the Philippines are already sourced locally and sustainably. These include tamarind, taro, coconut, and many more. In fact, our biggest food brand, Nor, will turn 50 years old next year in the Philippines, and it has led the way with a 2-decade-old nutrition and feeding program, reaching moms and malnourished children in underprivileged communities to teach them to eat nutritious and delicious meals. Today, we have actually reached about close to 3 million people just in the Philippines alone.
Well, Christine, I think we're having a bit of a problem with the audio. If you can come closer to the mic, that would definitely help, especially since you want to make this last point very clear here. Like what you mentioned, it's true that things are moving at speed when governments and the private sector actually work together. But how can consumers really make a difference?
So even a small change can actually make a big difference. And we have a lot of belief in the Filipinos. The first thing a person can do is more aware of the everyday choices that he makes, especially in how we prepare and consume our food. Small actions have an impact on the food system and can pose threats to the critical foundations of our lives. If we are all aware, then we have a better chance of coming up with good solutions as individuals and as a society that will protect our food system for our children. Every day, Filipinos can choose food that are produced in ways that are fair, healthy, and sustainably sourced. And consumers must also recognize their power to make this shift possible by demanding more and more companies transform their value chains and produce healthier products that are good for people and for planet.
All right, so awareness definitely is going to be that key first step in order to make that sustainable move towards, of course, that food ambition. Thank you very much, Kristine Gov't, Food and Beverages Marketing Director of Unilever Philippines.
Thank you very much.
And that's a first look into the business day this Tuesday, December 22, 2020. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And catch us again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. I'm Danie Laurel, and we are One News.